The U.S. Department of State expresses deep concern over Houthi rebels' violations against children in Yemen. Massam project demined thousands of Houthi rebels planted mines in Shabwa. International humanitarian organizations warn that Yemen is at the brink of famine. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Shaza Abdelbey. Yesterday, the U.S. State Department expressed deep concern over violations committed by the Iran-backed militia against children in Yemen. In a number of tweets on its official account on Twitter, the State of Department added, "We cannot ignore the ugly side of the conflict in Yemen, plus the violations that the Houthis continue to commit against children." This U.S. concern comes amid reports about Houthi recruitment of children in training camps. The U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, discussed the need to urgently end all forms of violence and address the humanitarian crisis and economic difficulties due to the conflict in Yemen. Greenfield stressed the need for the Yemeni government to have basic services and achieve economic stability. There have been recent reports of Houthi rebels imposing forced recruitment on children and increased fear of the expansion of these operations, classified as violations against childhood, especially with the start of new school year, a thing that exploited the terrorist militia as an easy hunt for recruitment. Houthi militia shelled civilian neighborhoods in Hais Hodeidah. A missile projectile targeted Muhyiddin area plus shrapnel were dropped on the parliament member house Nasser Zaid and caused damage to the house and the neighboring houses. The bombing was heard throughout the city of Hais and sparked a state of fear and panic among the people, especially women and children. Houthi militia renewed their shelling on civilian houses in Al-Tuhaita, south of Hodeidah. Sources said that the Iran-backed rebels targeted populated areas with sniper shots, causing panic and fear among civilians. Also in Al-Jabaliyah area, Houthis targeted people's farms. In Al-Fazza, however, the militia targeted people's house and travelers in the road of Tuhaita with direct fires. Since Houthi rebels seized the capital Sana'a in 2015, human rights violation acts have been committed on a daily basis as a thing which received local, regional, and international commendation. These violations reached their climax with targeting women, neglecting all social and traditional norms that the Yemeni society prides on, especially with regards to treating women decently. This report has more on some of the recent Houthi militia violations that target women in the capital Sana'a.
It's not normal. I don't feel like a human being. I can't breathe properly like other human beings. This is what a Yemeni woman said when asked to express her situation in Yemen, as her shaky voice reflected the sadness, hurt, and fear which women in Yemen have come to experience on a daily basis. Women in Yemen from Ma'rib, Taiz, and Sana'a experience violence almost all the time. In Yemen, women are solely responsible for securing food, water, and medicine for their children. In the light of the Houthi militia's theft of humanitarian aid and to use women to serve the war, women in Houthi-controlled areas face various types of violations, including the confiscation of their right to express opinion and demonstrate, as the Houthis have imprisoned hundreds of women in their own prisons and practice various types of torture and violations against them. Although the gender roles shift can provide an opportunity to elevate women's status when she is equipped with adequate abilities, women as a result of this transition have been further subjected to violence. The conflict in Yemen has had a horrific impact on all civilians, generally women, and girls have been disproportionately affected. The fighting has left the country's people struggling with the dire economic crisis, damaged infrastructure, and collapsed services. But in addition, women have had to contend with limited mobility due to cultural gender norms. Also, since they are responsible for providing food and care in their homes, they have had to struggle with the challenges of limited access to food, water, sanitation, and healthcare services, which has seen a steady deterioration as the conflict continues. The Yemeni women should be heard, and international organizations should look forward on this issue.
Masan project for mine clearing announced mining 4,744 healthy planted fields and unexploded devices in Shabwa. According to the project, the clearing operation including 1,500 anti-tank mines, 43 anti-personnel mine, and 3,250 unexploded devices. Masan officials outlined that these mines were planted virtual areas and pose a real threat to the local civilians. On the other hand, a member in the UN Experts Committee visited the headquarters of Masan Project in Aden and praised the program's efforts during the last 3 years, in which around 200,070 mines together with unexploded ammunition and explosive devices have been cleared out. The coalition forces reported that the air defense obstructed and destroyed a Houthi drone that was on its way to target areas in Saudi Arabia. A statement from the coalition indicated that the explosive loaded drone was intended to target Khamis Mashhad to the south of Saudi Arabia, adding that the coalition takes the necessary procedures to protect civilians and their properties from the Houthi militia's attacks. Turning to Ma'rib, where the coalition jets were reported to target Houthi military sites and vehicles in the city. Sources said that the coalition conducted 4 raids against locations and vehicles for Houthi militia in the front of Rahba, southwest of Ma'rib. According to the sources, the coalition raids resulted in big losses of lives and equipment among Houthis. Famine in Yemen adds to the suffering of people who are struggling with war and bad economic conditions. The current level of famine in Yemen is unprecedented and is causing severe hardship for millions of people. The following report sheds light on this issue.
It is a real crisis in a country that is already shattered by war. Yemen represents the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. It faces a host of dangers, the first of which is war. The country is suffering from displacement, COVID-19 pandemic, lack of necessities, and above all, people's inability to buy food. The current level of famine in Yemen is unprecedented and is causing severe hardship for millions of people. According to the World Food Programme, there are nearly 13 million of vulnerable people who lack food. Despite the ongoing humanitarian assistance, more than 16 million Yemenis are food insecure. The frightening nightmare of famine has returned to Yemen for the first time in 2 years in Hajjah, Amran, and Al Jawf. Over 5 million people in Yemen are on the brink of famine due to the conflict and the economic decline that have left families struggling to find enough food. The rate of child malnutrition is one of the highest in the world, and nutrition situation continues to deteriorate. A recent survey showed that almost 1/3 of the families have gaps in their diets. Malnutrition rates among women and children in Yemen remains among the highest in the world. More than 2 million children under 5 are in a bad need for treatment because of acute malnutrition. The humanitarian situation in Yemen is extremely fragile. Any disruption in the pipeline of critical supplies such as food, fuel, and medicine has the potential to bring millions of people closer to starvation and death. This famine problem in Yemen calls for the consciousness of the world to look more closely and to act in order to save millions of lives in the country.
Coming next. With a third wave outbreak of COVID-19, the Ministry of Health makes extra measures to face the pandemic.
ثالثتي على منطقة الروضة استهدف الأطفال الأبرياء اللي يلعبوا في الشارع يدعي للسلام يقولوا للسلام يقتل أطفالنا يقتل أطفالنا الأبرياء.
أنا قلت افتجعت ولا قلنا يلقى واحد صاروخ ثاني طلعت البيت حقنا عشان ألعب أنا وأصحابي والصاروخ انطرح.
Welcome back. Since the start of the conflict, thousands of livelihoods have been disrupted. Although international aid agencies are making great efforts to help reduce the suffering of people, yet their mission is still inner-core-field challenges, especially in the Houthi rebels-controlled areas. This report has more details on this story.
Humanitarian organizations continue to face challenges working in Yemen during the time of war. The ongoing conflict in Yemen has created drastic economic issues, with over 1/3 of the population living below the poverty line, and more than 4 in 5 Yemenis are in need of emergency humanitarian assistance. Essential services have almost collapsed, leaving millions of people in Yemen vulnerable to a humanitarian crisis. The conflict zones are suffering from food insecurity. Conflict and economic declines are the main drivers of food insecurity in Yemen. Since the conflict started in 2015, livelihoods have been disrupted, reducing income opportunities and the ability to purchase food. Food insecurity is most severe in areas with active fighting. Victims of this large-scale violence are civilians. 24.3 million people, that represent 80% of the population, require humanitarian aid, and more than 4 million are still displaced due to the violence. Infrastructure has been damaged by the violence of the fighting. The health system in Yemen has been extremely weakened after 6 years of conflict. More than half of the health facilities in the country are out of service, while many of the functioning centers have very limited capacities. With this humanitarian crisis, the International Committee of the Red Cross is working relentlessly in the field, providing food and basic household equipment to as many people as possible. They are also supporting healthcare facilities while trying to improve the conditions of prisoners. The ICRC team, along with other humanitarian organizations, were able to help millions of people in Yemen, but millions are still in need of help. There is an old Yemeni saying that if you truly want to know how people are feeling, you should look into their eyes. The eyes reveal everything. Panic, loss, despair, death, and fear are all you can see in the eyes of people in Yemen.
The National Committee Against Coronavirus announced the registration of 45 new cases of the epidemic in several governorates. Committee officials said on Twitter that 16 cases were recorded in Hadramaut, 9 in Aden, 10 in Lahj, 3 in Ma'rib, 4 in Taiz, 2 in Shabwa, and 1 in Al-Dala. Also, 9 deaths were documented in Aden, 3 in Taiz, 1 in Hadramaut, and 1 in Ma'rib, plus 13 recovered cases, 9 in Aden and 4 in Hadramaut. With the current updates, the total confirmed cases are 7,625, including 1,438 deaths and 4,702 cases of recovery. Amid the outbreak of COVID-19 cases in the country, the Emergency Committee in the Ministry of Health raised a large status and discussed several measures to undertake in order to be in full readiness to confront the third wave as it knocks in the door of Yemen. This report covers the measures to be undertaken by the Ministry of Health and the ICRC in the government-controlled areas.
A year after the first positive infected case with the COVID-19 virus was recorded in Yemen, the infection rate has increased and number of confirmed cases has been notably increasing the past days. Since August, the third wave of the pandemic has spread again. This made health authorities raise the alert status in areas under the government control in order to assess and monitor health facilities conditions.
The Emergency Committee in the Ministry of Health discussed several measures that the ministry will take to be fully prepared in terms of medical equipment to confront the third wave of the coronavirus, and also to follow up and provide the necessary needs that pose difficulties and obstacles to our work in confronting the epidemic in its first and second waves, whether in terms of the commitments of international organizations or in terms of equipment for the opening of the oxygen factory in Aden.
The noticeable increase of infected cases warns of the dangerous situation in light of the great pressure on vaccines and their lack of availability, which calls for a comprehensive strengthening of all health and preventive measures, working to activate isolation centers and raise diagnostic capabilities and health services.
لدينا 25 مركز لمعالجة كوفيد-19.
Today, there are 25 health isolation centers working across the country to treat the pandemic, including 2 in the capital Aden. Also, Al-Amal Center for Isolation has been reopened and work is undergoing on opening, listing and operating the center with full capacity next to a Sadaqa Center. Meanwhile, all other isolation centers across the country are fully operational and receive cases on a daily basis. Yet, there is an increase in the number of cases of the virus under the third wave.
We call on society and citizens in all governorates to adhere and follow all precautionary methods to confront the epidemic, as the virus has begun to spread rapidly and its symptoms are dangerous. In light of the spread of this disease, any patient who suffers from symptoms of the virus, please inform the operations of the health centers in the governorates and follow the instructions from the Ministry of Health and Population, so that the process of transferring the infected to the ICRC isolation centers could be done.
Infected are either reported to health facilities regarding their symptoms or not. Nevertheless, the pandemic threatens lives without exception. Yemenis are required to increase their efforts and knowledge of their health responsibilities to limit the spread of the pandemic.
The Central Bank of Yemen in Aden announced the arrival of $665 million to its account that was transferred by the International Monetary Fund. The bank made a statement that the transfer was made in accordance with the vote of the International Monetary Fund Board. The draft decision requires distributions of special withdrawals, which is around $650 billion. The bank indicated the amount will contribute to strengthening the external reserves of foreign exchange. This will support the national economy and achieve stability in exchange rate. Here's a reminder of the main headlines. The U.S. Department of State expresses deep concern over Houthi rebels' violations against children in Yemen. Massan project to mine thousands of Houthi rebels planted mines in Shabwa. International organizations warn Yemen is at the brink of famine. This is the end of the news. Thank you for watching.